Welcome back to the basketball show. Paul Sir, Ryan Reed, a little James Brown. You got to have a little funk in your life. Ryan Wolstat, Toronto Sun. Are you a James Brown fan?
Oh, of course. And I think, I don't know, I've ever been brought on a show with James Brown playing. I like it. I'm definitely down with that.
Okay, well, that's good. I don't know about the Sex Machine start of it, Ryan. You'll have to keep that to yourself. But welcome back, Ryan. It's great to have you on.
Heavily sampled song, and rap in particular. I think that song's been sampled about 1,000 times. So it's a good one.
Yeah, and you don't beat James Brown. One of my favorite James Brown stories was the epic concert where he kept, collapsing to the stage, and then people revived him, and the Rolling Stones were coming on after him, and they were so intimidated they didn't even want to come on and perform. But don't blame him at all. So, Ryan, we have, a lot going on in Toronto now. Masai Ujiri, what's kind of the vibe in the city about Masai leaving the Raptors?
I think it's a lot of shock. I mean, like the original plans for today's show, I was supposed to come in and talk about Colin Murray Boyles
exactly.
and AJ Martin, and we were planning to go down yesterday to meet these kids and get some first impressions in person, because we did talk to Murray Boyles the other day on Zoom, and then came the bomb, another Shams bomb from ESPN. And I mean, the weird thing was I had kind of heard a rumor about it earlier this month as I wrote, but no one really was saying anything when I tried to follow up, and a colleague tried to follow up, and it was just, people were keeping it really quiet. So to me, I don't know if I was as shocked as most people, but I just didn't really believe when I heard the rumor. The timing seemed way off, and that's why I was just like, I really don't buy this. Like, I think at some point, sure, but right now, it's just really weird. I think, the mood in Toronto is, I think people are upset. They're in mourning. I know there's a lot of people that aren't happy with the job Masai has done the last 4 or 5 years, or maybe until last year when they started turning things around a bit with their draft picks. But, this is a man that brought a championship to Canada, and I don't think most people ever really, if you follow the Raptors since day one, I mean, to imagine that they would get there, it was, it just didn't seem possible for a lot of the time. And plus, I think they were the 4th or 5th winningest franchise in the regular season for about a 9-year period. And that's just like, this is a franchise that had one 5-game playoff series win in their history when he took over. So, yeah, I know. Like, it's kind of an icon. Like the whole press conference yesterday was weird because I've been to a million of them where a guy gets fired that didn't do anything or didn't meet expectations. But it was weird going on where the guy actually did do it. It was just a totally weird vibe.
Well, it must have been a weird vibe. And I think that what I've wrestled with and where I'm even struggling to verbalize right now is, yes, the last 4 or 5 years, I think people have felt a range of emotions towards the job that Masai was doing. Like, was he distracted with all of his humanity? I mean, think of that. People are ticked because he's distracted with humanitarian efforts, bringing the NBA to Africa in a way that no one else did. The guy is just iconic in so many ways, and he did bring a championship here. And I do think and I'll run this hypothesis by you, if the Raptors had been healthy last year, for instance, if they picked up a healthier Ingram, if they had played together for a whole year, I don't think Masai Ujiri would be going anywhere right now.
Yeah, I mean, that would be interesting if they made the play-in and then maybe advanced to the playoffs. The thing, it's possible. I'm not sure. I think it may not have worked out either way unless they somehow stole around, which would have been highly unlikely. I think the question I was thinking was similar but a little different. Like, what if he brought Giannis here, or even Kevin Durant,
right,
who's obviously not at that level anymore? I think it would be awfully hard of MLSE to move on if he had delivered that his sort of white whale, and Giannis in particular. So that's kind of a what if. We'll never know. But it's just, I think it would have taken something like that for him to stay on, because there was really a desire for change at the top.
And that was going to be my question. That had to be the driving force here, is that powers that be, whoever they are, whether that's Bobby Webster or whoever, in tandem with other people, or if it's management, even above Bobby's pay grade, that were, looking just for a fresh start. But what I'm curious about now is what does this mean for the Raptors moving forward? And then we'll get into the draft picks and we'll get into the personnel. But what does this mean in your mind, Ryan, with your expertise for the Raptors moving forward?
I'd start off by saying I think very highly of Bobby Webster, the GM,
yes,
and Dan Tolzman, the assistant GM, president of or vice president of player personnel. Like, I think they do a great job. Their track record speaks for itself. Like, other than a few years of stumbles, their draft record is right up there with just about any team in the NBA, and that's not all Masai. Honestly, he started as a scout. He made his bones as a scout. He knows how to find players too, but it was a whole team, and Patrick Engelbrecht and the other people there, they do a really good job. So I think they're still in good hands as long as, most of the people stick around, and we know a lot of them just signed new deals, so they should be. But that said, you lose more than just the scouting, the eye for talent with Masai Ujiri moving on. This guy's like a statesman. He presents himself. This is, as we said, not just they never won anything and they're always terrible, other than the Vince Carter, or the brief Vince Carter flashes, and maybe the Chris Bosh when they first sort of won the division for the first time. Like they never did anything. And he's a guy that said, look, you need to believe in this team. We are capable of it just like any other team, and we can do this, and then delivered on it. Like Bobby Webster is not, or Dan Tolzman, they're quiet guys. They're not going to be out front, rah-rah. Like, they lost Tim Lewicki, who's about as flamboyant as the president of a corporation you can get, and now they lose because he was the head of Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, and he brought in Masai, and he turned around Toronto FC and made them, for a while, the class of Major League Soccer. He won, he helped the Leafs farm team win a championship, and the Argos dominated the CFL for a while, in part thanks to him. And then, you lose him, but you still have Masai to fall back on, that passion, that confidence, that belief, and also that ability to sort of get board members on board with, hey, we need to spend this or do this because it makes sense, whether that's building a practice facility or, going for players or spending a bit more on management. And you lose that. You lost it with Lewicki, and now you lose that with Masai. So basically, I mean, they can do a lot of the work of being GM and assistant GM, but I just think the presenting the Raptors, selling them on the players, all that sort of thing, like the face of the franchise is gone. Kyle Lowry went a few years ago, and DeMar before that. Those guys were the faces. But I think Masai Ujiri, as much as anyone in the history, even of Vince Carter, is when you think Raptors, you think of him. You probably think of him and Vince, maybe Kawhi, maybe DeMar and Kyle. But like losing a guy like that, and not. It's not like they were signing great free agents ever anyway, but it's just if they're making a trade, it's easier to sell a guy on Toronto if Masai's there, I think.
Ryan Wolstat, Toronto Sun, joining us here on the Basketball Show. We're talking Toronto Raptors basketball. Ryan, talk about the NBA draft. What are your impressions of the two picks that the Raptors picked up?
Well, I think Colin Murray-Boyles was a bit of a surprise, even though he shouldn't have been, because they kept saying they were going to take the best player available, and a lot of people thought he was a top 5 talent in this draft, just in terms of the impact he has winning games. And I mentioned Lowry, I compare him to a guy like that who maybe doesn't look the part of an elite athlete, maybe a little thicker, a little rounder, maybe not jump out of the gym athlete, might have a skill or something missing, but these guys just win you games. And even A.J. Martin as well is a bit small for a shooting guard, but look, he just helped lead Florida to a national championship. He made another Final Four before he got there. Like, they're bringing in winners that they really look closely at the playoffs, at the teams that were doing well, at the Pacers and Thunder, the guys that aren't afraid to get their hands dirty, that are going to go and battle every possession and get things done. And that's what they went over. They didn't go for a flashy, crazy athlete, even though Martin is a pretty crazy athlete as well. They went for guys that are just absolute dogs and that you should be able to count on them because they've been on the big stage and they've delivered. So it's interesting. I mean, he duplicates a lot of what Scotty Barnes brings, Murray-Boyles. Not as talented, not quite as big, but very similar. His measurements were pretty similar to Barnes in a lot of ways, and they're very similar to Draymond Green. And I know everyone's always saying, well, we're looking for the next Draymond Green, an undersized center who can really pass, really defend, and kind of guard every position. And they're really hard to find. But if you get a four-man Draymond Green, that's not too bad. And I think that can fit in nicely. And then when Barnes needs to get a rest at first, he'll be able to give you some of those things off the bench. You kind of get 48 minutes of that sort of player. And then looking beyond, they're hoping that maybe they can find a way to make it work together if you surround them with shooters.
He strikes me a little bit as a kind of a hybrid model of a combination of Draymond and PJ Tucker. Just a guy, like you said, a dog. It's nice to have a dog on your team. It's nice to have somebody that does the dirty work. And, I mean, he's still a very effective scorer at the NCAA level. And the fact that one of the criticisms of his game is he's not a particularly good three-point shooter, that is a factor. And I think maybe a little bit of the surprise that I think that a number of people felt was to get a guy who really wasn't that kind of player when there clearly is a need for it. But it is good to have that in the rotation. Now, one question I had, what does this do if the Raptors are committed? What does this do for the possible trades of other players? You hear RJ's name being batted around. What do you think this does? Who does this make it easier to think about possibly trading for other assets?
Yeah, they still need to figure out a way to balance out the roster. They do not have, like, one of the reasons I thought they might take one of the centers was, they kept saying we're not going to do for need because, again, we're taking the best player available. But they do not have a center beyond Jakob Poeltl, and they didn't even have a backup to Barnes, a suitable one. I mean, Jonathan Mogo's still a while away from being a productive NBA player if he ever gets there, and they also have experimented with him playing the wing a little bit. So they didn't have really a backup 4 or a backup 5. So now with Murray Boyle, theoretically, you have your backup power forward, and they believe that he can guard some centers. So maybe he fits in there. They don't have a lot of money to spend on a backup center because they're already right at the luxury tax, and ownership has only paid it twice in 30 years, and now you've got a new Rodgers taking complete control. Will they want to play? Will they want to pay it? So I think that's why people say, RJ Barrett maybe makes sense. You move him in a deal that gets you a backup center or a piece that makes more sense, or a backup point guard, maybe just something, because you sort of have a logjam at shooting guard, because as it stands right now, you might even see Brandon Ingram playing a bit there if you want to get Murray Boyles and Barnes on the floor at the same time. You have Grady Dick, who the team really believes on. I'm not as high on him as a lot of people, but Jacoby Walter's another guy who I actually am very high on. I think he's going to be a really good player. So you have a lot of options at shooting guard. So that's where people say, well, maybe RJ makes sense to move. And also, he's got a couple more years on his contract, but you're already up at the tax. Can you pay all these guys if you're at best like a team that might win a round of the playoffs at best at this point, and even that's probably a stretch. Like, does it make sense to be over the luxury tax? So I think that's where it all comes from. And I think they are going to need to make some sort of move at some point, whether it's, I forgot about Ochai Agbaji is one of their only good shooters. He can also play some shooting guard and some small forward. So there's a bit of a logjam there. So one or both of Barrett or Agbaji probably have to go at some point just to get balance to the roster and kind of to get the payroll under control a little bit. I think that's what everyone's thinking right now.
What is the state of Brandon Ingram's health? Where is he at? Is he going to be ready to go 100% when the season starts?
Yeah, from what I've been told, he's doing well now. He's he'll be ready to go. He's on the court doing stuff. I think they could have pushed the issue and he could have played if they were in contention last year, but they wanted to be very careful and kind of maximize their draft pick, which didn't end up working out. But,
right.
But I think, from every indication I've gotten is they're ready to go and they're really excited about how he fits in, because everyone keeps bugging them about you're the second worst shooting team in the NBA, and they keep insisting, the Raptors, that this guy is, he might not shoot enough threes for anyone's liking, but in the mid-range, he's about as good as it gets. And he can really, really hit jumpers, and he's going to get a lot of open ones with the quality of the guys passing him. So, yeah, he's just about good to go, and they have no concerns about him for training camp.
I'm sure Raptor fans are really excited to hear that, because that was a bit of a strange trade, and to go an entire season and re-up Ingram as well. But we all know he can play. And I think one of the things, Ryan, and I'm curious on your opinion on this, one of the things that is finally coming back into fashion in the NBA is the mid-range game. And that, of course, largely due to Canadian SGA showing that this is such an important part of a winning games formula. So to have somebody like Ingram who can get that shot and make that shot, what a weapon to have and to add to this Raptor lineup.
It's effective. You just saw it with these finals. You can't have, everyone always copies and wants to do the same thing. And we've talked on the show before about not really liking the 3-point explosion, and everyone's just chucking up as many threes as possible.
Absolutely.
And you just saw two teams in Indiana and OKC that don't play that way. You talked about Shea, that's his bread and butter, the mid-range. Pascal Siakam, he's a better 3-point shooter now than he was on the Raptors, but his bread and butter is still the mid-range and getting into the paint. And there's still something that could be said for that. You still have a lot of success. Kevin Durant is still cooking at close to 40 years old, mostly from the mid-range. LeBron James, mostly from the mid-range. Like, it is a weapon. If you're great at it, it's a real weapon, because all the schemes are built these days around stopping the 3-point attempts and stopping teams from getting into the paint. So if you have some guys that can really be on fire from the mid-range, that's a real effective weapon. I think the Raptors are going to have to rely on that, because they don't have a ton of reliable 3-point shooting, and as long as they're starting Barnes and Pirtle together, the shooting from anywhere is a major issue. But then again, Barnes has shown he could be a decent mid-range guy, as opposed to wait and see on his 3-point range.
I'm talking to Ryan Wolstat from the Toronto Sun here on the Basketball Show. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to ask you a question about Grady Dick, but I have to tell you, whoever at Gillette made the decision that Grady was going to be their poster guy, it's just hard for me to believe the guy even shaves, much less would be the spokesperson for a razor. But I digress. Ryan, you're not as high on Grady Dick as other people are. Why?
It comes down to me that he was billed as the best shooter in that draft a few years ago, and we just haven't seen it at all. Not in the G League, not in the NBA. The form is beautiful. In warm-ups, it looks beautiful, but in games, it has not translated. And if he's not going to be that, what is he? He's really good at moving off the ball. He can get some open looks, but he hasn't been great at finishing at the rim. And to me, the biggest issue is if he's not going to be an elite shooter, you just can you be successful with him, because he's probably the worst defender on the team right now. And they're a team built around defense, I know, so that helps cover for him a bit. And adding Murray Boyles and A.J. Martin's going to help too. But, what's the point of playing him over all the other guys you have on the roster if he can't defend? I mean, R.J. Barrett is a guy that gets flagged a lot for his defending, but he's just a lot bigger and stronger than Grady. And he made, I think, some significant strides defensively last year just by maybe trying a bit harder and using sort of his length and strength. And right now, Grady's still a pretty skinny dude, not like a elite athlete. So yeah, the main thing is if he's going to be terrible defensively, he better be bringing it elsewhere. And it's not impossible. Like we said, at Kansas, he was insane as a shooter, and you don't just get billed the best shooter in the draft for no reason. Like, it's there, but he's going to really have to show a lot more, especially with a guy, in my opinion, in Jacoby Walter, that is every bit as talented, if not more, and maybe has some gifts elsewhere. And it actually has that dog mentality defensively. Like, they put him on a lot of really good players late last season, and he didn't look too bad doing that. So I think that would be why.
I look at Grady, and here's my one asterisk, because everything that you said, I completely agree with, and the numbers don't lie. But one thing I've never felt with the Raptors yet, and I love their coaching staff. I think they really try hard to get the most out of the talent that they have. I think they're adaptable. But one thing I have noticed that I would love to see is them commit to a shooter a bit more than they have, as opposed to the shooter being there. I still get the feeling from the Raptors that a shooter's role is primarily as a second or third option, as opposed to running things to get a good shooter shots. That would be the one thing I would love to see for Grady Dick, for him to be able to prove whether he can do this or not.
Well, that's a fair point, and I wonder if Brandon Ingram's presence will help if you play them together, because then you have a guy that is a bona fide NBA marksman that teams are going to be putting a lot of pressure on, and that's going to make it easier for Grady. And maybe you design some plays where Ingram's the primary threat, but Grady's there as the backup, and that gets him cooking. It's interesting, like, he still gets a lot of gravity. Like, players really still run at him, and they're terrified of leaving him open, even though the shot hasn't fallen. So I do find that interesting, and a few of us, my colleagues in the media, have wondered, like, how long that's going to continue if they don't start falling. But I do agree, yeah, if they run some more stuff for him, it should be beneficial, and I would like to see that as well. But I do think having Ingram out there will make things easier, because really it's it's not been a lot of shooting around him in his 2 years in the NBA.
No, there really hasn't been, and their actions don't really they don't really emphasize it. I know this enough about shooters, is that if your only role is that you'd better make this because you're only going to get 2 or 3 a game, that's a tough position to be in, and that's more suited to the D, the 3 and D player that can go into the corner, and that's the only shot that they're expected to take. And they seem to respond to that well, and then they're supposed to dog the ball. But a guy like Grady is the kind of guy you got to run off screens and you got to run actions for. That also should make Ingram's job easier as well. So I'm curious to see how the coaching staff adapts to it. And again, still comes down to whether they do or not, Grady's got to start hitting his shots.
And that, like you said, he is really good at, one of his real strengths is moving off the ball, getting himself open, cutting, all sorts of things. And you're right, they just haven't done good enough job getting him the ball in those situations, because that is one of his major strengths. Like, I know some people said early on, like, look at how a guy like Peja Stojakovic played and maybe try to do a lot of that sort of thing. Not saying
totally
you can be a shooter like that, but Peja was great at getting open and moving around, and he had that European style. And maybe there's even more to that Grady Dick can do. And definitely the Raptors can do a better job of getting him good looks.
Final question for you, Ryan. What is your prediction? What does your gut say the Raptors are going to look like next year? With the presupposition that they'll be relatively healthy for most of the season with their existing personnel.
I would be surprised if they do a lot more. I think they'll be looking to some in-season stuff more. They do have all year to get under the luxury tax. So I think they'll be looking more trade deadline, that sort of thing. At that point, a guy like RJ Barrett would be with just like a year and a bit on his contract. Ochai Agbaji needs a new deal, but I think he'll have value. So I think, like I said, one of those guys might go eventually, but heading into camp, I don't see a lot unless, I think they're going to try to look on the bargain market for a backup, a veteran center, and that might be just about it. Like, they have a pretty full roster right now. They're going to have a bunch of guys in Vegas, Summer League, competing for some G League spots or two-way spots. They have some unguaranteed contracts, so I don't think they'll be that different. But I think as is, assuming Ingram is able to stay healthy, I think, to me, they're absolutely a play-in team. Like, the East is taking a major step back. There are a lot of teams that have been really weakened, whether on purpose, with Boston selling off to get away from the taxes and the penalties and the aprons and all that stuff that I barely understand, but you got to be a math wizard to figure it out these days. But yeah, I think the Raptors, I think they're going to be, to me, they're a playoff team if healthy, because the East is down and they just need a little bit of help up front, and that's the thing.
Well, I think I share that same opinion, and I think it will be real exciting for Raptors fans to see the team more competitive throughout the season, and hopefully they'll start the flame back up for the team that's been fading since the championship. So exciting times. Ryan, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been really fun talking to you. I hope we can do this again soon.
Yeah, for sure. It was fun. Thanks for having me. All
right. Ryan Wolstat, Toronto Sun, joining us, talking Raptors basketball here on The Basketball Show. Going to take a break, and then it'll be closing time with Ryan and Paul.